Today, we are going to be doing an updated suit jacket sleeve shortening, a 2.0 from our older version. Let's get started. Okay, so if you really want a treat, I do want you to go back and watch that original video for two reasons. One, it's in the old shop, so you can kind of see like our roots and a little throwback, which is a lot of fun. But two, there are a bunch of adjustments. I'm gonna make some different changes to the way that upgrades, evolutions to the way I used to do it to now. And I'm super excited and overdue to share these with you. So let's jump right in. Let's start with chalking. So here you can see I've got a safety pin because I've literally just tucked it up and pinned it on the customer so that they can roughly see the length of the sleeve when they're fitting. I'm gonna put a chalk mark at the bottom of that crease. So this safety pin here is not where I'm gonna hem it, it's just holding this extra fabric up inside. So I'm gonna chalk the edge of that there so that I can take the safety pin out and let that down. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Now I'm gonna measure down the underarm seam. This one is important to me because I believe that this is the most accurate way to measure the overall finished new length of the sleeve. So I'm gonna measure straight down the underarm seam, and then I'm gonna remove an equal amount all the way around the cuff. This is really important because different styles of suit jackets have different shapes. Not all of them are just a straight cuff. Sometimes they curve or they slant with the kind of bridge of the hand. Whatever the shape is, I want to maintain that. So I am going to get my measurement and then I'm going to maintain that throughout the procedure. So here we are at our armhole seam, which is perpendicular to our underarm seam. I'm going to chalk those so that they're a little bit easier to see. Great. So I'm measuring straight from the armhole directly down the underarm to our new measurement. And it looks like that is going to be 14.5. So we're going to be removing quite a bit today, which is fun. So knowing that, let's get started opening the cuff of the sleeve. So first, there is no easy way to do this. We're gonna take everything off and open everything up. I know what you're thinking. Can I do this without going all the way? No, you can't. Trust me, if there's a shortcut, I've tried it and failed. So I'm gonna save you the trouble right now and tell you, you are gonna have to go the whole way every time. So just do it the right way the first time. Save yourself the trouble, save yourself the hassle. Also, speaking of saving yourself the trouble and hassle, get a really fat safety pin and put all of those buttons directly on it and pin it to the front of your lapel right now. Do it right this second. If you think that you will keep track of these 4 buttons, beautiful and matching, that came with the jacket, you're wrong. You won't. Pin them to the jacket right now. Now, we're gonna start opening things up. What you see me pulling apart there, that is just the leftover thread from where the buttons were sewn on. Again, the buttons aren't functional, but they do go through both layers of this semi-functional placket. What you're looking at here is faux buttonholes and a faux placket that doesn't open all the way, but it does open partially. This is the most common, traditional way that you're gonna see a suit jacket sleeve put together. So this is a pretty universal process, the way that we're doing it. Now, I'm just gonna start taking the lining and separating it from the outer. Because really the lining plays a small role. We're gonna push that up into the sleeve and do most of the work on the bottom outer before we need to get back to that. And I'm just separating it completely by cutting those stitches. This is a gorgeous lining. It also is a two-tone weave, so it's got kind of like a photo negative look where the front is more tinged green and the inside is more tinged brown, where you've got contrasting woven threads. Very cool. Also notoriously leaves holes from the stitching, so be really careful when you're tearing this out because it's going to leave punctures and we don't want any more than we need. Okay, I'm going to shove this inside. Now we're left with this. Okay, cool. Now what I'm going to do is one side of this placket is mitered. That means it kind of comes together in a little cute triangle, okay? The upper is usually the mitered, and the lower one that it's covering, this guy, is usually just folded over on itself. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. This seam ripping process is really important. Sometimes in the shop, I'll have someone or we'll have somebody prep a garment by seam ripping it all open because that can take a lot of time. The thing that you lose out on when you don't do this process and pay attention during it is you are going in reverse of everything that you are about to do. These cues and noticing the differences between jackets, even though this procedure is pretty uniform, noticing the way that this is constructed is going to make a huge difference for you. So this is definitely the type of thing that I would do in one sitting, and also I would definitely only do one sleeve at a time. This is a really important one because if you open up both sleeves, you have no example to go off of. So especially when this is a new process for you, if you don't have that other sleeve to look at, you're going to be sad because especially if you have to get up and do something in the middle of it and come back to it, that's going to be hard. So leave that other sleeve, do each side in its entirety before moving on. You'll be really, really, really glad. All right, I've opened up the mitered side. See, it's like that. And now it's like that. Awesome. Now let's move over to the other side and open that. One other important thing that you're going to notice is that I am doing all of this sitting at the table, not at the iron. That is intentional. We do not want to press out these creases until we have got our new lines marked in. We want all of these creases to give us indicators for moving forward with shortening, okay? So everything is still being opened up. Oh, I'm sorry. I opened up the two sides of the placket, and then I went to the underarm seam, which has a tack in it. That is going to be located right here. So it's placket is on the upper side of the arm, under seam is down here, and there's a tack right there that we'll put back later but needs to be released. So that's what you're looking at there. And I see that it's right there. We want everything to be able to lay out flat. So that's what we're doing here. One last thing you'll notice, you see how this side flipped up just fine when I released it, flipped right up, and this side isn't? Let me tell you why. Not only is there interfacing, that gray that you can see in there, but there is also some stitch witch that we will have to gently peel apart that is holding that in place. So that glue that sits in between the interfacing, and if that gives you trouble, you know what I'm going to have to do? I will gently put the iron on it and heat up that glue and then gently pull it apart. I think it's going to release for me. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Good, good, good. So now, here it is. That is the whole opened up sleeve. One last thing I'll do is go back and pull out any straggler like threads from sewing on the buttons, just because I really want my slate to be clean as I'm getting into this. I don't want to have little threads poking out and getting sucked into the new stitching lines just because I'm a professional, of course. Okay, notice too that we are still on the outside of the garment, all still intentional. I'm lining this up on my grid because it'll make it easier for me to make my new marks. So, assumption that we are making, may it be true or not, we need to make the assumption that they correctly and evenly cut the raw edge of the garment when they were sewing this the first time in the factory creating it, okay? Because we are going to measure off of the bottom and then this crease from our previous hem up to our new line. Let me re-chalk real quick so that you can really see that. Let's look and see how much we're gonna be shortening. I like to measure up from the crease line, but I do have the raw edge of my fabric along my gridded table below. I just find that having everything gridded up makes it really easy for me to remember where I am. Okay, it looks like, because I drew my chalk line a little bit fat here, I am going to, actually, let's do this. Let's make this a little bit easier for you as well. I'm gonna chalk that crease line. Let's see how much we're shortening. We're gonna say it's between 2 3/4 and 2 1/2. I'm gonna go with the 2 1/2 and veer on the 1/4 inch slightly longer side for this case, just because my chalk lines are a little bit fat. So let's flip to here and start marking off from the crease line. We are not gonna cut this on the double. We're gonna mark it all the way around. That's really important. 2 1/2 inches up, all the way around. Great, great. And great. Okay, very important. This is not your cut line. This is your new hemline. So that's why we measured up from the crease. That is our new hemline. We still need to leave ourselves a good fair amount of seam allowance or hem allowance because this is the part that folds up inside and gets connected to the lining. As you may have noticed, lining on sleeves for suit jackets almost never, it shouldn't, come all the way to the edge. We have almost an inch, inch and a half of what we would call a self-facing, meaning the self fabric is folded up on itself inside. So we need to leave ourselves, for me, I love a full 2 inches. So measuring back down from that new hemline we just marked, now I'm gonna go a full 2 inches down. That is our cut line. And I'm kind of balancing these up. So trying to make it as straight as possible. And I'm just looking at that there. Okay, now I'm gonna get a nice heavy duty pair of scissors and we're going to cut up to that new line. Okay, larger view of what I was just marking out. Again, we have the actual raw edge that was tucked up inside. We've marked our new cut line. And now we have a new hemline here as well. And that is a full 2 inches. So I wish that I could tell you this is standard. It isn't standard. It is just something that I've noticed works really well for me because I love having a full 1.5 inches almost inside as the self-facing and then another 1/2 inch for the lining to be connected to. That will make more sense as we get in there, but the important part is that for me, my hemline is 2 inches above my cut line. I always leave 2 inches, but don't assume that the company left 2 inches inside. So if you need to lengthen a sleeve, really important that you check it because that may or may not be the case. Okay, we are ready to cut this. Now, while I'm talking about this and while we've got like a larger view here, one of the other things that I want to talk about is suit sizing in general. Sleeve length is a really interesting one because I'll have people ask me about it. Like, the suit size is a number and then a letter. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And the letters are S, R, L, XL. The common misconception is that these letters are referencing small, no one knows what the R is, large, and extra large. The letter does not have to do with your body girth. That letter is referencing the sleeve length. So slim or traditional fit, those types of things, and that number, 44, 46, 48, that is your chest size. That is giving the overall girth body size, and the letter is actually S for short, R for regular, L for long, and XL for extra long. And what's important about that is if you are not buying an XL because you're a tall, skinny person, wrong. Your chest size is the number. So you could be a 44 XL. The XL is going to give you that sleeve length that you need. So if you aren't getting that sleeve length right, it's probably because you aren't looking at the letter the right way. Short is going to be for anyone about 5'6" and under, so that's S. Regular, I'm going to aim, is going to be from about 5'6" to 5'10", and then 5'11" and above is going to be long. XLs, extra longs, are harder to find, but do look for them because for those, 6 foot and above guys, 6'3", 6'4", like my husband, that's what he needs. I've got to lengthen everything on him. So he's looking for a moderate chest size, but an XL in that sleeve length. So super important. Okay, ready to cut? Let's look at it one more time. 2 inches. This is my sleeve length. Yeah, I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it. That 2 inches gives me a good barrier as well for future adjustments. So I'm confident about that. And as you can see, I'm cutting on a single layer. I am not cutting all the way through both of them. Absolutely, you will not be accurate if you think you're going to cut through both sides at once. Do not do it. Don't even think about it. Stop thinking about it right now. I'm just going to move it. Okay. These scissors need to be sharpened. Let's do a video on that. And bam, perfect. Okay. I'm going to keep this. When I'm doing a sleeve shortening, I keep all of the scraps that I cut off to uniformly make sure that everything stays the same. This procedure is very scientific. It's step by step, exactly the same, and I want to make sure that I can retrace my steps if I need to. So that is going up on the lapel as well. That poor lapel is getting really weighted down, but that's okay. Now, before I move back to recreating my placket with the single mitered edge and the turned up edge, I'm going to flip to the inside so that you can better see this. These faux buttonholes are cute, but we're getting rid of them. They are going to end, right now there's 4. You can just barely see them. But with our new hem, 1 of them will be sitting right on the edge and 2 of them will be above, and that looks kind of dumb. So we're going to remove them. Really important detail here. If they are functioning buttonholes that have actually been cut, like you can use them as a true buttonhole, you're out of luck. That is a totally different procedure than this one, and I'll make you a video on that next. For these faux buttonholes, this is just stitching. So it's kind of annoying to remove, can be a little bit persnickety, but it's best to do it because it looks cleaner, it looks nicer, and it allows us to put the buttons back up where they should be once we've shortened it. That's going to be our last step. So let's go through and remove each of these faux buttonholes. So what I mean to say by persnickety is it's really like super annoying. These little tiny stitches are really hard to see. They are hard to remove, but they are usually chained together. So if I start at this end closest to the edge and I pick a couple of the stitches, I try to loosen them up, and then sometimes you'll get really lucky and it will start to unravel for you, which is not happening for me. And when it doesn't happen, you just have to unpick them each individually. It is the worst. If it's not happening, I'm kind of going back and forth from the front and back and pulling the loose threads as I cut them to see if I can get any of them to run. But like I said, I am not getting lucky here, which, albeit, is common. So let's see. Otherwise, like I said, just invest the time and pick them out. But, oh, did you see it? Okay. As I was picking, I'm pulling the loose threads with my fingernails and trying to get them to run, and I did. So check this out. It's just popping. And now, all the way off. Oh, thank God. 1 down, 3 to go. And then I'll just flip to the other side, and that will release the upper threads as well. Good. All right. With this method, usually it's the edge closer to the placket opening that has the stitching that is going to release that way versus the one that's further into the jacket. I think it's probably has something to do with the production line and the way and time that they're put in. But let's see. The other thing you want to be really careful of while you're doing this is that you don't create any holes in the fabric, which admittedly is hard to do. So you got to be really careful with this procedure. It's a hard one, but it's worth it. It will make the jacket look so smart in the end to not have those buttonholes hanging off the bottom of the sleeve. They will thank you for this. Okay, let's see. I will admit I'm not feeling super lucky on this one, but that's okay. Also, these are typically, this section of the jacket is typically interfaced, so you've got a little bit of barrier so that you can see, it looks like I'm pulling up some of the fabric, but I'm actually only pulling up interfacing, not true fabric, and that's good, because that's going to prevent us from creating any holes on the correct side of the garment. No? No? Not a chance? Not interested at all? Cool. And in this case, I'll just try to slide a few stitches onto my seam ripper at a time and just cut them a few at a time. That's what I have to do when I can't get it to run. Okay, perfect. All right. I'll catch back up with you in a minute. See you soon. We are finally ready to flip this sleeve inside out. So I'm going to reach inside and pull this baby out. Slide the lining up again. And now, remember that we already know our new hemline is 2 inches above our raw edge. That is good news because we really want to put our hemline back in. What's also good news is that we're still just barely on the edge of this interfacing that they've already placed in there. Most of the time, you will not need to put new interfacing into the jacket. Most of the time, there will be enough so that you can just keep what they've got instead of installing more. In this case, that's what I'm gonna do. If you did need to put more interfacing, I am going to link my favorite down there, but I like to use a medium weight fusible. I do like this kind of felty looking gray, and I buy it in a 2-inch or 3-inch roll so that I don't even have to cut it to the exact cuff width. I just straight up put it on there. All right. Now, let's do the easy one first, okay? So we're coming back to the side. We're coming back to the side that is underneath when the placket is together. So upper, lower. We're gonna do that one right now. The lower just folds up back on itself. So if our new hemline is right there, we've got a little bit of stitching in our way. We're just gonna cut a little bit of that stitching that's holding that placket together because we were coming relatively far up the arm. And then we're gonna fold this back on itself at that chock line. So like that. And we're just gonna throw one little pin right there. So that's what, oh, I'm a little bit far. Hold on. One more time. Roll it up a little bit more. Now, can you just barely see that there's still a crease here from where it was originally sewn? Even though we're moving it up, we can still see that crease line, which means we still know where our stitching line should be. And in this case, it's just a little baby 1/4 inch hem allowance. That's great. We're gonna follow that trough again. I'm actually gonna flip this to the outside gently to show you, to help you position where we are. Does that make sense? And then I'm gonna flip it back out. Cool. You can do this. Stay with me. This is hard, but just imagine that you're teaching yourself origami, you know? What a useful skill, right? Just kidding, I do think it's really useful. Okay, now for the hard side. Again, we have a crease line just barely here. That, reminder, is this, okay? I'm gonna chalk that on the inside. Right here. I'm gonna press really hard to try to get that. You'll notice it's a continuation from actually where the sleeve is stitched together into a tube right there, okay? That is the opening. Then you can see my chalk line for the new hemline. Okay, we have a point, we have a crossing right there, all right? Now, there is a line. There is a line right there from where this was folded up on itself. We can't tell exactly how that worked anymore because I've cut off the extra. But roughly, using that angle, we're going to come up through our cross. Again, 2 lines meeting perpendicular. This is the edge of our placket right here. To get that mitered edge, we are going to put a diagonal line directly through that point, okay? This is the hardest part, so stay with me. Perpendicular to this line, we're going to fold it, okay? Line, line, diagonal line, perpendicular to that diagonal line, you're folding it back on itself with the point right at the center. Okay? And then I'm gonna put a pin through it, and I'm gonna see if I caught it on the other side. Let's see. Yes. Let's do this one more time. I know you're gonna hate me for this, but one more time. Edge of the placket, new hemline, diagonal for the miter, fold here, cootie catcher, straight up cootie catcher right here, okay? And then I'm putting a pin directly through my chalked diagonal line, and I need that to match up on the other side. That diagonal line is being folded onto itself and it needs to match up. Now, you are gonna notice something here. This edge and this edge do not meet. They're not exactly the same. That is okay. The thing that matters the most is that that cross point is at the edge of your fold. That is your starting point, where the two original perpendicular lines met. You can do this. This is every miter that ever existed, and if you do this right now, you know how to miter things, which means you're like completely and totally a professional at everything, okay? Now, we are gonna finally do some sewing. Let's go to the machine. Collect yourself, we're getting there. So again, we have our two pinned edges of the placket. That's all we're gonna sew, and then we're gonna jump right over to the iron and continue there. So I'm gonna do the easy one first. And it's just a matter of kind of maneuvering it under the machine, especially because these pieces are right next to each other. So I'm gonna sew right in the trough for that folded up side, which is the under side of the placket, the covered side of the placket. And I'm gonna go all the way to the edge, really important, okay? That is it. And then we'll flip to the other side where we have that chalked diagonal line. And then we're gonna sew directly through that chalked diagonal line as well. Okay, that is it here. Let's jump over to the iron now. This procedure doesn't require a ton of tools and equipment, but the ones that it requires are totally essential. You gotta have them. One of them being this bad boy. This arm pressing board is one of my very favorite things. We couldn't last one day without it here. Very important. There are collapsible types, and that's great. I know it's convenient, but I will tell you, this substantial metal frame and wood, I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. And it is the most crucial thing if you want this to actually look good, because you could do all of this work and do all of these steps, and it still will look lumpy. There's just no other way to put it. Not straight, not clean. This is the only way to get your clean edges, is to get a lot of good pressing in between the sewing. You can't just sit down and do the sewing. You gotta do this, and then walk back over it, and then walk back, and then walk over it, and that is right. So, I've not flipped these edges out. It is very hard for you to see what you're looking at here, but as a reminder, on the other side, this is what you are looking at right here, okay? Flipping these is very important. I'm gonna stick my thumb inside of the folded edge. I'm gonna place my fingers pushing the 1/4 inch seam allowance to the back. And then I'm gonna switch their positions. Let's do it one more time. Thumb is inside. Fingers are on the outside. Flip. Now the fingers are on the inside and the thumb is on the outside. And that is how you're gonna get that nice edge with a little bit of stitching that needs to be cut. There we go. Okay? Same principle, slightly different angle, mitered side. Remember I told you those wouldn't match up? They don't. It's still fun. Thumb goes inside. My thumb is right there. Finger goes inside, and these fingers hold that down, okay? And then flip. This finger is now on the inside. One more time. Thumb, fingers, flip. This is so important. If you do this right, and then you take the time to iron this right now, I will make you a totally unreasonable promise that you will love this. You will love it. if you do it this way, okay? Now, I'm positioning my new placket. Do you see what it looks like? Do you see how it's already looking like that gorgeous new placket that we want? I'm positioning the miter will go over top, but because we're on the inside of the garment, remember, the folded edge is underneath right now. And then we're pressing that bad boy in place nice and hard. Oh yeah, ow, that's great. Perfect, I love it. It hurts so good. And I'm pushing it as it's warm because most suit jackets are, you know, cheap, expensive, it doesn't matter. They're still gonna have enough wool content in them or natural fiber content in them that they will be able to mold. The reason that I know this is because so much of suit jackets, regardless of the quality, do require molding around the shoulders, around the chest, around the body, that they're going to have a certain level of natural content. What I mean by that is natural fibers in the content of the fabric that I'm telling you, you're gonna get a certain level of molding, and that is a good thing. And we're gonna take advantage of that because that is the magic of tailoring. That's where it comes from. So now you notice I'm pulling 2 inches up. Why? Because that's what we agreed on. That is our hem allowance. And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna grab myself one little straight pin to hold my placket closed. Pink. Didn't have to be the pink, but I wanted it to be the pink. Okay, I'm gonna hold that closed with that, just as I'm doing this for my own psychosis. Okay, I'm telling you, unskippable step right here. I know you think you can skip the ironing. I know, even after all this time together, you think that you can, but you can't. Don't do it. Okay. Let's take a breath because we've hit a milestone, which is the outside is almost entirely done. Looks sick, looks just awesome. Now, let's visit our little lining here. He is going inside, and he's coming out. I'm coming in. Okay, now, I'm gonna press the crease out. Unlike the outside, I am just gonna press this crease out because it's not usually straight. It's kind of just like was jammed together at the last minute. So when it was being produced. So just press that flat for your own sanity. And this is where my little scrappy comes into play. I am gonna remove the same amount from the inner that I removed from the outer. I am assuming that the proportions of the lining to the outer fabric were originally correct. Again, it's an assumption. I can't prove it, but I have to have some assumptions or we'll never get anywhere. So I'm going to assume that the amount that I cut off is the same amount that I should cut off of the inner. So I'm literally gonna lay that on there. I'm gonna give myself a little line with my heat pen here. Can you see? Yes, good, perfect. And then I'm gonna cut it with my good scissors. All right. Oh, you will notice as well, I press this totally flat, and like I said, the edges don't often match up. The lining, admittedly, sometimes is, I think, a little bit of an afterthought in production, and so I find that they are not usually even. I am gonna cut straight through because I did iron that totally flat, and I'm gonna cut both sides at once. That is getting added to our adorable little scrap heap and going directly back on the lapel. I know that these steps seem insane, but I don't want to tell you how often I do this. And it's enough to prove that it's worth it. That I will tell you. Oh, sorry, back to talking out loud. What am I doing right now? Next up, do you see this right here? This is the underarm seam. Do you see that it's already been top stitched close? That's because that's how they put it together as well. We are going to go in through their same hidey hole to reattach the lining to the outside of the garment. So I'm not going to open this whole thing. Actually, it's a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but I am going to open that enough to be able to pull both of the edges of the sleeve out and to fit my hand inside. Oh, yeah. Okay. Cool. That's great. Okay. Let's sit over at the table while we pin these together, and then we'll jump back to the sewing machine. There we go. We're back over here at the table and we have our lining underarm seam sitting on top of our outer underarm seam. You can just barely see that through the opening, okay? Now, putting these back together is really interesting because we need to fold them together the right way so that when we flip them back out, they're sitting the right way. So I'm gonna reach my hand through the hole in the opening that we created, in the lining opening that we created. And I'm gonna come down here, okay? You see that? Lining underarm seam, outer underarm seam. These two, I'm gonna pinch together, right sides together, correct sides together. And I'm gonna hold on and pull that out. Do not let go of that. Underarm lining seam, outer seam. I'm gonna pin that together and then I'm gonna pull it back out so that you can see it again, okay? Do you see how these are now folded together so that their correct sides are together? That's how we have to sew it. So when we pull them out, you will notice that it is very hard to tell where we are in the garment. Keep that pin holding those two underarm seams together. Very important, because that is your home base so that you know where you are. Then you're gonna start pulling the lining edge out and pinning it to the outer. So you'll be able to see the wrong side of the lining and the interfaced wrong side or inside of the outer layer. I am gonna start putting little pins through here and continuing to pull in a circular motion the lining and outer out through the opening in the lining and pinning those things together until I can feel that I'm getting to the placket. You see that there? Okay. We are not gonna go over the placket. We're actually instead gonna go back to our underarm seam and pin the other direction. So I'm gonna get close, but not go over. Now, I'm gonna shift back to the underarm seam and begin matching those up again. Okay? This is the easiest time to get lost in the garment. So if you feel like you can't figure out where you are, gently pull everything back out through the lining hole opening again. So now that everything is pinned together here, okay, I am gonna pull these apart so that you can understand how it's going together. Can you see that? Do you see how the lining is meeting the outer together and this open space in between? It's coming out of the lining hole opening. And now I'm gonna flip it just to show you. I wouldn't normally do this because it's pretty delicate while it's pinned here like this, but I'm gonna gently flip it to the outside just to solidify. Ah, right? Okay. This will make sense when you are handling it yourself. You can do this. Okay. Now, I want you to grab, I'm gonna grab 2 small pieces of stitch switch, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like, but I'm gonna bring those over to the machine with me, because do you remember in the very beginning when we had the 2 sections that were not on seams and they were stuck up to the sides? We're gonna replace that stitch switch now as we're sewing this all together in one easy seam. Okay, let's go over to the machine. So I don't like to sew this in a continuous circle, like I said. I really do this one in chunks because the placket is on one side, but I want the underarm seams to match up on the underside. So I'm doing a half circle and then I'm gonna come back and do another half circle. Also, very important part for this whole kind of order of operations is, like I said, I've brought over some Stitch Witch, fusible glue web. And I have 2 little chunks here that I've just torn off my roll. They're about 1 inch wide. Each one of those I'm gonna put on either side, halfway in between the seam and the placket. The reason that I wanna sew from the outer edge is because if I sew a piece of this Stitch Witch onto the lining side, the glue will melt and immediately become visible and hideous, like a stain on the lining. So it's really important that this is only placed on the outer side. I'll get back to that in 1 second. Let's put our needle in and begin.
That's what she said.
Now, I have accounted for a 1/2 inch of seam allowance, so my edges for the lining and the outer are gonna match, and I'm sewing about 1/2 inch in. Starting right there on the underarm seam and moving forward. I'm at about a 2.5 stitch length, and see how I can see my placket coming up here and see my underarm stitch there? That's how I know I'm gonna put my little cutie here, my chunk of Stitch Witch right in my line of sewing. And I'm just gonna throw that bad boy right in there. Roughly halfway, not exact, not necessarily hugely important, just has to be there. The measurement doesn't matter, it's just that you need it there. And now I feel that my placket is coming up here. I'm just gonna get as close as I can, back stitch and stop, okay? Now I'm going back to my underarm seam, repositioning the fabric. As you can see, it's kind of tangled up. You're still doing it right, but it is hard to envision, and that's all right. I've rolled the sleeve all the way to the other side of the placket now. You can just barely tell. The reason that you know that is because this jacket in particular had an additional black piece of interfacing, so that's also another clue or indicator of where I am. You're making sure that both sides, the lining and the outer, are nice and flat when you're doing this. And now again, I'm just getting as close to the placket as I can. And now I am sewing toward my underarm seam. I do backstitch when I'm doing this. And then after I get about halfway, I'm gonna grab that other piece of Stitch Witch and just run that right along. Moving as I go, taking just a few stitches each time, and then continuing on. And now I'm already overlapping that underarm seam again. Awesome, okay. Let's take this over to the iron and flip it to the outside. We're gonna kind of see where we're at and potentially press all of this glue and everything in place, and we may be ready to move on. We're gonna check the opening of the lining over top of the placket and see if things match up well. If not, we might make a few corrections. We'll see. The sleeve still looks like this. I haven't flipped it out yet, okay? We're gonna do that right now. I'm gonna tuck this back inside that lining opening and pull it on out. This is always the part, one of the parts where I am so glad that I've already pressed this crease in, because I immediately get a sense for whether or not this looks right. Immediately, even before ironing again, I can tell that I really like where we're at. One other thing that I may not have mentioned is I still have that pin holding the placket edges on top of each other. I've kept that in the entire time since we placed that the last time we were at the iron. I'm gonna even leave it in now, but I am loving the way that this looks, and I think I'm ready to press from the outside. So I'm going to leave this open. We're not quite done. I'm gonna pull this out and slide this onto my arm board. Now, I am gonna take this pin out and I'm gonna press that really nice and flat. Making sure that everything lines up. I don't want one of the sides of my placket longer than or shorter than the other. So this is all of the stuff that we're checking now. We're really checking all of our details now. Ow. Love it. Okay. As this cools, I'll put my pin back in. I don't want my pin in there while it's hot because you can really set the impression of the pin badly. So now I'm gonna put it back and now I'm gonna flip. One of the other things that I'm doing, let me see if I can like send you down the tunnel here. One of the other things that I'm doing as I'm pressing is I'm using my fingers to push that lining up inside so that I've got that beautiful facing and then the lining, and all of it is being pressed in place. Now, we are halfway between the placket and the underarm seam, so you know what that means. This one is melting that glue. So we really want to give that a lot of steam, and then I'm actually gonna set my little clapper on there just to get a really good set on that glue. We are gonna come back and tack this underarm seam together, something that we cut earlier, in just a moment, as long as everything looks good. Oh my gosh, do you see this little bit? There's like little runs of teal in here. This tweed is magnificent. If you have ever considered buying or making anything in tweed, like, here is your sign. This is gorgeous. Okay. The last thing that I want to show you while we're over here is let's find, oh, look at how beautiful that is. Look at that. Let's find our opening, because you know, we didn't sew the lining entirely around. Do you see that? We are gonna close that now as well. I just wanted to get a good feel for it and make sure that everything was looking the way that I wanted. Now, I'm gonna reach inside and find that area right there where it's still separated. I'm reaching my hand inside and pinching lining and self together and then pulling it out. Don't let go. If you let go, you will just have to do it again. You will never be able to line them up perfectly. Do you see how my stitching stops there and stops there? Okay, let's close that little bit. Here and here, you see my lining, sorry, my stitching end. And so very easy to see on the lining side where I need to put that line of stitching. However, not so easy on this side, obviously. So what I'm gonna do is gently hold that together and throw a pin in here, but don't forget that pin is down there because I don't want you to run over it. But that is where we're gonna sew, but on the other side. I am holding this in sort of a upward circular facing position. We are really going kind of blind here. We're still shooting for the 1/2 inch-ish. And now that I have my presser foot down, I'm gonna slide this out, okay? Because I don't wanna run under that, over it, and I don't wanna forget it's under there. Now, I'm gonna try to look for my stitching. It's very hard to see because we did pick a good matching color, but my stitching starts again right there. We're just gonna aim in a nice straight line and go straight for it, okay? Few stitches at a time, readjusting as we go. Almost there. Okay. Let's see if we did it. A teensy bit wonky, but you know what? That is good. That's gonna work. We're gonna keep that. I am going to favor less lines of stitching because this lining is beautiful but delicate. So it's okay if it's not perfectly straight in this case because this is all internal structure that can be adjusted with the iron from the outside. And also, I mean, personally, I don't think you can tell the difference. It is plenty straight enough for us. There we go. Oh, so excited, so excited. Okay, now, the last thing that we're gonna do before we close that hole up is we're gonna put a tack on the inside right here. So I'm gonna reach back in again. You know, I'd like to point something out here. Have you noticed that I am not ambidextrous? I am right-handed. However, I don't know if you've noticed, but I do the majority of this procedure with my left hand. The only reason that I bring this up is because I do think that learning skills like sewing are really useful in that we don't have a lot of reasons to use our non-dominant hand in our regular life. And I do like to think that there's some sort of connection, something fun there. So as I reach in again, I'm just noticing, again, I'm using my left hand and I like it. I like this new like exercise in life. You know, we don't always get to learn new things and use those new parts of our brain, but they're in there. Anyway, okay. So I'm reaching in here, I'm holding this together, and then God, I wish that we had one of those like scopes that you like put down your throat to see your stomach. That's so weird. So I'm holding with my right hand, and then my left hand is inside here holding the seam allowance of the lining and outer sewn together against the underarm seam. You see how they cross perpendicular to each other? Hold on, let me show you again. This seam I am holding against this seam outside right there. Actually, look, you can kind of see where it like pinches together. That's where my fingers are. This way, sewing this and this together, that is really cool because it's secure and not at all visible from the outside. So that's a really sneaky little trick. I'm gonna put a pin in there, and then you'll notice from this angle that you can't pull those apart. That's what we're doing. Okay, let's slide that under the machine and literally just put a little baby tack in there. All right, I'm just flattening this to make sure that it's exactly where I want it. The tweed does make this a little bit tricky because as you can see, the raw edges do start to unravel on the inside of the garment. That is just the way it is. Now, the other thing you want to make sure of is that you literally aren't catching anything other than those two perpendicular hem allowances, seam allowances. And you can see just barely the glint of my pin right there. So you know that that's where we're sewing it. And now I'm gonna push everything else out of the way and slide that under. Yes, this is tricky. Yes, it is. Okay. That is it right there, that little tiny guy. And let's see if it worked by pulling on these. Awesome. You see that little dimple right there? That is where it's stuck together, and that is what we want. Okay, but not visible. Shouldn't be able to see stitching anywhere. All right, now let's slap these guys right back together. We're gonna top stitch in exactly the way that they were. And just try to match up the edges as cleanly as you can. And I try to get it pretty close. Great. Awesome. Perfect. All right. Look at that little beaut. Perfect. Love it. Love it. Okay, now, what's the last step? Buttons. Let's go put that little placket back on again, and we can do that over at the table. Roxanne's Quilter's Choice. I've never looked at that. This one. Okay. Normally I would use wax skein for this, but it's green and they don't sell it in green, so we're just gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way, straight off the spool. Okay. So we've checked to make sure that everything looks absolutely divine, and it does. So now all that's left is to put the buttons back on. This is a button placement card. This is like a very obvious promotion, but they're the only people I know that make it, so good news. Wawak literally sells this little beauty, and as you can see, 4, 3, and 2. It is exactly what it looks like, a button placement card. Most of the time, we're using the 4 edge. So I am lining up this card directly on the edge of my placket, on the edge here, folded edge here, and the bottom edge there, and literally just going straight through with a white pencil and marking those. That's gonna be a little hard to see on this tweed, so I'm gonna try to give us a little bit better placement, but you might have to remark or reposition, so don't worry about that, that's fine. Okay, now I've got my little buttons up here, and I am gonna pull my stack off and put that there. I'm gonna thread this up with 2 doubled over pieces, and I'm gonna make them about the length of my elbow. And really, that's actually just an old wives' tale rule. Basically, it shouldn't be longer than your forearm because that's all the further that you can comfortably pull the thread. And so you only have control up to that point, and then that's it. So for me, that's kind of short, which means usually I have to rethread for each side. So this means 2 doubled over pieces is 4 pieces of thread, and then I'm gonna do my usual waist knot, where I roll the thread ends together, wrap it around my finger, and then use my thumb and ring finger, forefinger, don't know which one that is, middle finger, to pull it off. Okay? Now, it's an ugly knot, that's why they call it a waist knot. And I'm actually gonna put it on the upper facing side of the suit jacket. And then I'm gonna take my little needle here and I'm going to start from the correct side of the garment, which means I will be putting my knot directly underneath the first button. Now you'll notice that I'm going all the way through. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I personally think that the extra security of a couple more stitches going through the buttons and through all of the layers, including the lining, is worth being able to see the little pinpricks of stitching on the other side. Some may not agree, and they will put the buttons on the inside of the outer only before they finish closing the lining. Hold on, there we go. And that is also fine. It's just that I find that I really like having that little extra support that gives me. All right, I'm gonna go through one more time here. I'm also, you notice, looking underneath because I'm trying really hard to keep all of my stitches piled up in kind of the same place there. I really like that. It's cleaner because since you can see them, I do want them to look nice. All right, this time I'm bringing the needle up and off to the side, not through one of the buttonholes, okay? The reason I'm going to do that is because I do not tie off each button. Instead, I'm going to wrap the thread twice around the stitching underneath. It's giving a little bit of a thread shank, let's call it. Then I am sliding my needle in between the layers of fabric only, not visible on the other side of the garment, and coming up where I'm going to put my next button. Does that make sense? Sliding through there. Look at the underside here. See how you can't see my needle? I am intentionally not catching the lining there, and then I'm bringing it back up, and now, bam, I'm ready to slide on another button. So I am stringing all of these together on the same strand and trying to keep all of the underside stitching as minimal as possible, but still functional. And I am going a little bit slowly because I really don't want to get my thread or anything tangled up. I want it to just be really nice and clean and tight as well. There we go. And preferably, I'd really like my buttons to touch. And in this case, we call that kissing. So they're just barely touching. If you see a jacket that has buttons that are all like actually overlapping, that's called cascading buttons versus kissing buttons, which are just touching. I prefer kissing myself. Good, okay. And I am just about ready to come up to the side again. You see that? And I'm making sure that I'm not getting any loops or pulls or odd knots on the underside. And then wrap, wrap, and slide through up to the next placement. Great. This is really actually quite hard to see. The color matches are all really great, and then the chunky tweed does actually admittedly make it a little bit difficult. Okay. And as I'm sewing as well, I'm looking at this edge, which is the edge continuing on into the upper bicep seam, actually, and just trying to make sure that my buttons are placed equal distant away from there. That's going to be really important. And then I'm using my left hand to hold everything up and just keep everything smooth underneath. I'm using my fingers of my left hand to create a space for the needle to come, but also to make sure that everything is sitting up, easy for me to see, easy for me to maneuver. There we go. Awesome. Just checking to make sure everything looks good. And then I'm gonna do my final wrap. And to tie this off, I'm gonna slide my needle through the little thread shank, so the thread stitching under the button. And I'm not gonna pull it all the way through. I'm gonna leave that loop just like that. I'm gonna catch it with my needle once, and then I'm gonna come back through that loop I just created. Do you see that? And pull the first one tight, and then the second one tight. Okay? And then I'm just gonna thread my needle off to the side, not catching the lining underneath. And this is truly just for aesthetic purposes. I'm just putting that thread tail over there before I cut it off, because I hate cutting right at the base of the button. I think it weakens it. So I'm threading that tail in between the layers of fabric before I cut it off. I won't remind you that there's a second side, but you did such a great job. I mean, look at this thing. Look at this. Beautiful. Oh, and the green and the edges and the crisp. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one. This was a labor of love, but it is one of the most common things that I personally think a tailor will alter. And though it's common, I think it's obvious at this point, but important to point out that just because we do something frequently doesn't mean that the work and the craftsmanship aren't incredible and essential and important every single time, every step of the way, even if those steps are things that we've done before. So thank you so much for joining me on this one. Ask me questions, leave me comments, like, subscribe, do all the things. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
Yeah.